Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is David Jordan, and I have the honor of being one of the pastors here at First Baptist Decatur. We are just very thankful to be a venue for events like this where we are challenged to think differently, we have our imaginations expanded, and we are placed in the opportunity, or given the opportunity, to have hard conversations that need to be had. So thank you for being here, and if you would please silence your cell phones, and if you have need of a restroom, there are restrooms out these doors to the right and to the left, and there are also restrooms at the foot of the stairs in the back. Thank you for being here. We gather in a sanctuary, and a sanctuary, of course, is a sacred space. We also want this to be a safe space, and we would like it today to be a brave space. So we're thankful for being able to share this place with you, this space with you, and this time with you. Welcome. I'd like to call Joe Davich now to the microphone. We are so thankful for our partnership with Georgia Center for the Book and with Charis Books. And so, Joe, it's a pleasure always to work with you and have you here.
Thank you, David. It's such a joy to work with the church. There's a lot of events that we do over here that, it takes so much to put on, and between the greeters that they have and the audio staff. And a reminder, speaking of the AV staff that's working here, we record these events. So if you've missed any of the events this week, I've been told that the Buried Truths event is on First Baptist YouTube channel, and hopefully we'll have last night's event and tonight's event up by this weekend, possibly Monday, for you to watch. So also, if you haven't signed up for the Georgia Center for the Book email, we also put those links in there so you can rewatch those and enjoy them as well. As David said, also thank you to Charis Books, wonderful independent bookstore, one of the oldest feminist bookstores in the United States here in Decatur, and we're just so happy to have them here tonight. So we have two wonderful guests for you for this conversation this evening. Of course, our moderator for this evening truly needs no introduction. She is so well known to Atlanta and to Georgia, and is also nationally known for her best-selling novels. She's a graduate of Spelman and is a professor at Cornell, and is also the Charles Howard Candler Professor of Creative Writing at Emory University. But since her novels, like Leaving Atlanta, which discusses the still raw emotional trauma of the Atlanta child murders, Silver Sparrow, which gave name to a group of half-siblings that were affected by their lives, built by absent fathers, and of course, An American Marriage, which truly redefined that institution in literary form. That, of course, is the one and only Tayari Jones. She is here this evening to talk with Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, whose novel, The Chain Gang All-Stars, just recently came out to great acclaim. He is the New York Times best-selling author of Friday Black, and his work has appeared in the New York Times Book Review, Esquire, the Paris Review. He was also the National Book Foundation's 5 Under 35 honoree and the winner of the Penn Gene Stein Book Award. Would you please welcome to the stage Tayari Jones and Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah.
Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you for coming. And we want to start off by welcoming him to Atlanta. He's never been to Atlanta before. I know, everyone's like, is that possible?
I mean...
Have you never taken a plane because you had to change planes in Atlanta?
I've been in the airport, and this time around, my publicist was like, is there any city you absolutely for sure want to go to? And I said, I've been all over the country. I've been to Portland 5 times. I've been to Oregon like 5 times. And I said, if I don't go to Atlanta on this trip for this tour, it's becoming anti-Black now, Like there's no way. But yeah, thank you so much. It's absolutely my honor to be here. And of course, with the legend that you are, I'm honored. For real.
Well, I am delighted that we're able to be here and to talk about this extraordinary book. I know it's just out, and if I'm not mistaken, you did the Today Show this morning?
I did. I was in New York just a couple hours ago, outside in the plaza, all the chaos.
What was the most exciting thing to happen?
To me, I think the most exciting thing was there was a Broadway play happening right over there as I was like trying to sign books.
What play? What play?
It's called Shucked.
Shucked?
It's about corn. So if you're into corn, they're nominated for like 9 Tonys. I found this out from the Today Show. But yeah, there's a play called Shucked. It's about corn. I'm sure it's about more than that, but like they did the first number and it was mostly about corn.
What's it called?
So that was exciting. I guess also being on the show was also exciting. I met Al Roker.
And it is the Today Show pick, correct?
It is it's their May pick, so the book of the month for them.
Yes, was it Reading with Jenna?
Read with Jenna.
Yes, so we will be reading with Jenna with this book. I know it's just out. I'm assuming most people have not read it yet. Well, I'm going to do my best to try to explain. It's a really good book. It is a complicated book. So, well, maybe you can tell us what the book is about.
Yeah, I think I could, if I were trying to describe it, I would say, really I could probably show you better than I could tell you. So maybe I'll just read from the beginning, do my little intro, and then we could talk even more about it.
All right, everybody, pay attention, get ready, take notes.
Didn't that feel very natural? We actually decided that we would do that backstage.
I'm trying to coach him on this being on the road thing. He's like, how about if I say, I can show you better than I can tell you? I was like, that's great, do that. And then he does it, and then he says, we practice that.
I just didn't want to feel like I lied to you.
Young people.
I'm not that cool in real life. Before I get into the actual text, again, I'm feeling extremely grateful. This is the very beginning. We're actually not calling it a prologue because on Twitter one day, I don't know why I did this. I was like, when you guys see a prologue in a book, you definitely read it, right? And to my dismay, many people say no. I found that very discouraging. And so we ended up just calling it like.
But did you ask these same people, when you see a book, do you read it?
Right. My thing was just like, when you play music, do you start the song 37 seconds in? Like what? Why would you?
Okay, with no further ado, the not prologue.
The not prologue is called The Freeing of Melancholia Bishop. And just to set up a little bit, this book deals with the carceral system, and it's an imagined future in which convicted wards of state can opt out of sentences of at least 25 years to participate in death matches. And also, to set it up again, I guess I can talk about it a little bit. Just because it helps me get into it, I've been practicing this thing. If I raise my hand, y'all think you could say something? If I do like a mark like this, y'all could say the word bishop. Want to try this practice? 1, 2, 3. Sort of like that, but a little more,
We need a little like bloodthirstiness in it, correct?
So, exactly. So, 1, 2, 3. Oof, chills.
That was good.
And I'll give you my mark. I'll give you the mark when it's time, so don't worry. This is called The Freeing of Melancholia Bishop. She felt their eyes, all those executioners. "Welcome, young lady," said Mickey Wright, the premier announcer for Chain Gang All-Stars, the crown jewel in the Criminal Action Penal Entertainment program. "Why don't you tell us your name?" His high boots were planted in the turf of the battleground, which was long and green, stroked with cocaine-white hash marks like a divergent football field. It was Super Bowl weekend, a fact that Wright was contractually obligated to mention between every match that evening. "You know my name." She noticed her own steadiness and felt a dim love for herself. Strange. She'd counted herself wretched for so long. But the crowd seemed to appreciate her boldness. They cheered, though their support was edged with a brutal irony. They looked down on this black woman, dressed in the gray jumpsuit of the incarcerated, She was tall and strong. They looked down on her and the tight coils of black hair on her head. They looked down gleefully. She was about to die. They believed this the way they believed in the sun and the moon and the air they breathed. Feisty, Wright said with a grin. Maybe that's what we should call you. Little Miss Feisty. My name is Loretta Thurwar, she said. She looked at the people all around her. There were so many of them, so many waves of humans who would never be the object of such cruel attention, would never know how it made you feel both tiny and all-powerful, how the thrum of thousands was so loud, so constant, it could disappear from your ears, but continue to roar as something felt in the body. Thurwar gripped the weapon she'd been given, a thin, spiraling corkscrew with a cherrywood handle. It was light and simple and weak. Not Little Miss Feisty then? Wright said, walking a wide orbit around her. No. That's probably for the best, Loretta. He stepped towards his box. I hate wasting good names anyway. He laughed and the crowd echoed him. Well, Loretta Thurwar. He threw his playful condescension directly at her, chopping her first name into 3 hard syllables, using a sing-song child's voice for her last. Welcome to the battleground, baby. There was an electric cough in the air, and Thurwar was pulled down so forcefully she feared for a moment her arm had been dislocated at the shoulder. Kneeling, not knowing what else to do, she started to laugh, chuckling first, and deep laughter. The feeling of hold that came from the magnetic implants in her arms was actually one of gentle massage under the skin. She could wiggle her fingers freely, but her wrists were glued to the platform, the ridiculousness of it all. She laughed until she fell out of breath, then laughed some more. The bells began to sound. Wright screamed into the air, "Please rise for Her Majesty." He ran the rest of his way to the announcer's box. The crowd stood on their feet. They held themselves still and erect for her. She walked onto the faux football field, aluminum alloy on her arms, braids that stopped at the back of her neck, exposed shoulders, each tattooed with the Whole Market trademark logo. A series of rods jutted out from her chest guard and circled her muscled abdomen to form a sleek cage. It was a custom creation. Thurwar had watched, even cheered, the first time she'd seen that the metallic pieces, initially thought to be exclusively defensive, were more. She'd been watching, huddled with the others in her cell block around the streaming video feed, when the woman had removed 2 rods from her hip guard and pressed them into Slingshot Bob's eyes. And now, Thurwar was seeing them up close. This was Melancholia Bishop's final fight. Bishop had made it. She had done what no woman before her had done, survived 3 years on the circuit, 3 years of slamming down her hammer, Has Omaha, and swiping her mace, Vega. 3 years conquering souls. Drowned King County's very own Queen of the Damned. All she had in her hands was her helmet, Melody's helm, Crusader style, made of tin with a gold cross down the middle. The Annihilator, the bad news bitch, the death songstress herself. The 7th bell rang. The people screamed. For years, this had been their sacred ritual. The 7 bells of Melancholia Bishop. They'd seen her wipe scum off the earth. They'd seen her kill women and men whom they'd once claimed to love. Now she stood and looked out at them for the last time. Soon she would be free. Melancholia! 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 The crowd chanted. Her brown eyes explored the bleachers. Then she raised the helm above her head. Once it was on, she was home. Melancholia! 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 For the last time ever! Wright cheered. Please help me welcome the winningest woman to ever step on the battleground, the mistress of the murder ballad, the sacred sweetheart, the crusader, the baddest the planet has ever seen, your very own Melancholia Price. Your very own, Thurwar thought, rattled by the force of love that exploded out of the audience. They loved her so, and still this woman, despite it all, belonged to none of them. She had an aura about her that made that clear. It was enough to push Thurwar's eyes down to the ground, as if the woman in front of her truly were royalty. Thurwar watched, bowed in her keep, an impossible power in front of her, the hammer and the mace. On one side of the field, there was a knight in her armor. On the other, there was Thurwar in a jumpsuit, a corkscrew slick in clammy hands. Any final words for us, Melancholia? Wright asked. What's left to say? Her voice echoing metallic but familiar through her helmet as she addressed the crowd. I'm in the same place I started. The crowd cheered wildly. When I got here, I had 2 M's on my back, 2 murders. When I leave, I'll still just have 2. But I've had to kill so many more than that to get here. That's very true. You've cleaved through so many, Wright said. But any of those stand out to you? So many highlights. And you overcome more than your fair share of doubt. Here at the mountaintop, when you look back down, what are you proudest of? Proud? A metal face turned toward the sky. Her shoulders bounced and laughed. The crowd followed awkwardly, chuckling because this was their queen. As the crowd grew raucous with laughter, Melancholia fell silent. Then was a moment where the crowd seemed not to know what to do next. Lock in, Wright yelled. Again, a force sounded, this time locking Melancholia Bishop into the platform beneath her. The HMC, that's like a floating camera thing, the HMC that she had been speaking into flew up behind her. The crowd let out a small gasp. To force lock her, to silence her on her freeing day, it was beneath them. A sudden force lock was what you gave the despicable, the uninitiated, the unruly, the afraid. And so they turned their noses up at it, but turned them back down just as quickly to take in the history unfolding before them. The freeing of Melancholia Bishop. Let's deathmatch, Wright yelled. The loud, empty sound of unlock called through the arena. The women were released upon each other. Thurwar stood up and she ran directly at the unbreakable woman in front of her. Once she was close enough for it to matter, she leapt into the air and pulled back her fist, clenched around the corkscrew, and aimed to strike. She screamed, thrust down, the neck, her body said the neck. Melancholia snatched her by the wrist, dissolving her force to nothing, then punched her in the gut. The people screamed to the beat of the bass drum. Again and again, they'd seen her catch and crash, had seen her drop Haas Omaha or Vega and grab her opponent with one hand before using whichever weapon she still held in the other to deal a death blow. But now she held this nothing by the wrist and threw a bare-knuckled punch, a blow anyone could survive. She was playing with her food. They laughed and cheered and cried. A show woman to the end. Swing through, not at, Melancholia said. This the people could not know. In her helm, with no HMCs buzzing around, the 2 women on the battleground were alone with their words. Melancholia punched Thurwar again and threw her down to the grass. Thurwar knew she'd been spared. She didn't know why. She swallowed the death she'd seen in the moment Bishop had held her. She looked up at the heroic, terrible woman standing above her. Can you hear me? Melancholia asked. Thurwar scrambled through the field, panting hard, sweeping over the green. She lost the corkscrew. She hated herself. an intense, familiar feeling. She was crying. She pitied the sad thing she'd become in that moment, hunched and searching, frantic and soon dead. But her murderer was speaking to her. "Listen to me," she said. Then Thurwar felt a kick to the ribs. She rolled over in the grass, gasped air in, and scrambled to her feet again. She gathered herself and looked at the crusader. Thurwar wanted to win. She wanted it desperately. She had a furious desire to crush this woman in front of her. She wanted the crowd to weep. For the first time in so long, she wanted to live. With no weapon at hand, Thurwar ran at Melancholia. Before she could leap, she saw that both the hammer and mace were on the ground. The Titan was making a game of her life. She sprinted and tackled the woman with the urgency of the dying. They tumbled together briefly, their bodies rushing over white hash marks. Then Thurwar felt a tightness at her scalp. She reached up in the tussle and felt a blow to the chest. She was dragged by her hair to her knees. "Shave all of it," Melancholia said, her fist full of Thurwar's hair. This time, Thurwar heard her, understood she was being given a directive. "Shave off your hair," Bishop repeated, her voice hard and low. She punched Thurwar in the face again. Thurwar tasted blood falling from her nose to her lips. Again, she was thrown to the ground. "It's right in front of you," Thurwar heard. "Choose now." Melancholia raised her arms in victory. The whole world screamed. Thurwar saw it, the coil of metal stuck into the wood. She leapt at it like a snake, and in her rush to grab it, she cut her own middle finger deeply. She ignored the blood, rose to her feet, and as she did, Melancholia Bishop turned to her, then reached down and grabbed the hammer. Thurwar took long, careful steps as she moved in a wide perimeter around Melancholia. The noise had settled to an even roar, but the sound was just an echo now, as was the pain in her body. "I played their game. You don't play it." "I'm not dying here," Thurwar said. A long, smothered part of her emerged. "Then swing through, not at." Thurwar watched Bishop. "I am very tired," the other woman said. "Do you understand?" "I'm not dying here," Thurwar repeated, the words summoning themselves. She continued to circle Bishop, backing further away, gathering space to charge. Bishop followed her in a smooth pivot. "Then swing through, not at, and shave your head, and make them love a version of you. That's the important part. Whatever you do, love, then get out." Thurwar waited, corkscrew clenched in fist. Bishop's knees bent just enough for her stance to say, "Come at me." Maybe we'll stop there.
Well, they have to know what happens.
You want me to finish it? I'll finish it.
Don't you have to know what happens, else you won't understand anything. You gotta go, keep going. You're
I'll
almost
keep
there.
going. I just wanted to check in with you. If y'all are good, I'll finish it. Bishop's knees bent just enough for her stance to say, "Come at me." She looked at Thurwar and spoke. I'm not going to let you live. You are going to choose to live. I'm going to swing across my body. Once the hammer goes, I can't stop it. Understand? Thurwar did and she didn't. She couldn't, not then. Thurwar reached for her helmet and pulled it off. Even against her dark skin, the scars on her neck gleamed. Her black hair was in tight cornrows. Melancholia raised her arms and the crowd screamed anew in delight. Thurwar looked up at the Jumbotron. It occurred to her then that this god was a woman like her. Melancholia Bishop smiled briefly once more before her face became hard and murderous. Thurwar stepped forward toward her destiny. Her left arm pumped into the air. Her hand was cupped loosely, and she shot her right leg up, planting it as hard as she could. She pushed forward, fully immersed in the freedom of building momentum. Her eyes were trained on Bishop's neck, as supple and human as anyone's. Her left arm careened back, scooping the air and hurtling it behind her as her left leg jutted up. Her knee pulled forward and her stride grew. She ran. Her left foot fell first. The midsole landed and she rolled purposely to her toes before pushing off again. Her body remembered, would always remember, how to run with purpose. Again, her arms reversed themselves, slipping precisely past each other as her right leg rose and fell, her stride opening still. She was very close. She thought of nothing, put her trust in her body as it sped forward. Her arms switch-bladed and her legs carried. She continued the push and switch of her arms and legs, forging speed. Her body told her, this speed, me, your body is your weapon. When she was 2 paces away, Melancolia's arm swung backward, a negative motion, a buildup. She pulled the hammer back, a picture of destructive potential. Thurwar's foot came down, Melancholia came forward, pushing first, then letting the hammer pull her. It swung across the air in a murder song. Thurwar dove toward the ground, tucked in her head and neck, and rolled as the hammer sowed fresh death into nothing. She crouched and then leapt, her right corkscrewed fist leading. She screamed as she ripped open Melancholia's jaw. The silence bore something new in Thurwar. Her body tingled as red fell into her fist. A spattering of blood burst from Melancholia's lips. The hammer rose briefly and crushed down, just grazing Thurwar's shoulder as she twisted out of its murderous path. Thurwar jumped onto Melancholia's back. She wrapped her legs around Bishop's waist and stabbed hard to the side of Bishop's neck, then pulled the corkscrew out and punched it again. This time, as she tried to pull it out, the screw resisted, caught in the tangle of Bishop's flesh. Thurwar pulled harder, and when she did, the handle came out alone. The metal screw lost somewhere in Bishop's throat. With nothing with which to pierce, Thurwar punched Melancholia's head. She'd given 3 heavy blows before she felt the champion's knees buckle. Bishop swatted weakly behind her at Thurwar, as if at a pesky fly. Her hammer was on the ground. Thurwar drank the sweet, rich silence of absolute awe. She screamed a roar, and in that moment, she was the only sound. She jumped from the woman's back, and Melancholia stood sleepily, somehow still. Seeing the woman on her feet, Thurwar scrambled to grab the hammer. Her fingers found the grip, and Melancholia looked down at her. Suddenly afraid, Thurwar jumped back. Bishop swayed, holding her neck and letting it go. Her eyes were brown, beautiful, tired, and yet they widened for a moment as she looked at Thurwar, her killer. "Come at me," those eyes said. Thurwar obeyed. She ran. She brought the hammer like a bomb to the face of its first master, and the people, those people, were silent no more. Thank you, guys. Ooh.
You know, they say about people who write, if you write a memoir, everyone tries to catch you telling a lie.
Yeah.
And when you write fiction, everyone tries to catch you telling the truth.
Yeah.
I don't think that you have to worry that people think this is autobiographical.
I don't think I have to worry about that too much.
But this world you've created, okay, so you have these people who are in prison can get 25 years knocked off of their sentence, correct?
If they have 25 years, they can be freed, maybe.
Yes, if they have if you're serving at least 25 years, you can sign up for the prison fight deathmatch reality show.
Yes.
And if you can stay alive for 3 years, you can be free.
Exactly.
And it's men and women.
Yep.
And the world of it is that it's in the future, correct?
Yeah.
How far? Like tomorrow?
Like, I think sooner than we would hope.
And part of the way that if you're there, that you are restrained, is there are metal rods implanted in your body, and therefore magnets can hold you in place. So they can magnetize the things around you to restrain you.
Yeah.
And you can't, and since the metal is in your body, you're always vulnerable to that.
Yes, absolutely.
Then there are these different teams. I'm trying to help y'all. There are these different teams, and each team is called a chain, and each member of the chain is called a link.
100%.
And
It's like watching a book report happen.
And then, so the people who are on the same chain shouldn't have to fight each other because they're on the same team.
Yes.
And they may happen to be in love.
Yes.
Okay, that's what the book is about.
It's pretty straightforward.
I want to ask you,
ask me.
where did this is a very nice man. He's a really sweet person. And
I was sad to even read the end of it. I was like, I knew it was coming, and I was like, I see pews. I don't want to talk about stabbing somebody's neck right now.
One reason I did want you to read that is that this work is so visceral.
Yeah.
Where did all of this come from? Have you ever been in a fight?
Not for a long time, but I played sports. I think that, surprisingly, the reason why I think a lot of my books have some kind of like intense darkness, that visceral, sometimes violent aspects, is I'm pretty squeamish, actually. I'm not a big fan of like gore and horror. I'm not like a Saw person. I'll never watch a Saw movie like because of me. Usually it's like somebody's like kind of forcing me to do it or something. But I think at its heart, that means I'm like sensitive to things. And I'm also sensitive to like stories I hear in real life, even if I don't see it. And so I think this book had to have an incredible sort of visceral violence, as you've kind of just seen, because when I think about our current carceral system, I think about the fact of the capital punishment. When I think about the fact that America imprisons more people per capita than any other nation, all these, I mean, whatever you want to say about it, it feels like a great violence, and I had to like sort of distill that somehow. I think a lot of the violence of the carceral system is behind the wall, so we feel desensitized or impartial or we don't really care. And in some ways, the main conceit of the book is that the prison system decided to not only remove that wall, but put it front and center and profit from it. And the world of chain gang is a world in which that's happening.
You know, I also thought there was a critique of sports, specifically football, in there with the thrill of watching people hurt one another.
Yeah, it's fun. I am a fan of the game of football in some ways, but I haven't been able to really like engage with the NFL since 2016, and Colin Kaepernick tried to make a stand, and maybe most of us remember that story. He was kneeling during the anthem to bring awareness to police brutality. He was then blackballed from the NFL. And besides that, the NFL has a long history of not caring about these players. We know about CTE and all the different dangers it has. But for me, it's also just about this, I don't know, disposable nature of the athlete. The idea that these predominantly people of color, predominantly black humans can be like worshipped, but also quickly discarded, and worshipped to perhaps their own detriment, lionized and like held to high regard for their ability to like, I don't know, give out and absorb violence. It just felt very interesting to me. And I say that as someone who was a fan of the sport, but the politics behind it made it kind of hard for me to engage.
Well, and also, you know, rich people aren't letting their kids play football anymore.
Yeah.
And this idea too, like how the people who are on the Chain Gang All-Stars, it's their slight chance of getting out. And it's worth them to risk their bodies, risk their lives for the possibility of getting out. And I also think sports are very often positioned that way for people who live in difficult circumstances, that maybe you can football your way out of this, maybe you can basketball your way out of this. And the odds are not good.
It's almost impossible. I don't know if people watch the show Last Chance U. It's on Netflix. It's about like a junior college football team that and the players are trying to get from there. It's like a traditional 4-year school and a scholarship. And I love the show because the stakes are so high, but it's really about exactly what you're talking about. And one of my favorite players from one of my favorite seasons, he's hurt and he can't play in the game, or he wants to get back in the game, but the coach isn't putting him back in, but then also the coach is like being, cruel. But anyways, the thing he's saying, I'll die for this. He says, I'll die for this, is what he's trying to tell, to show how much he wants to get back in the game. And you could tell he means it 100%. I'll die for this. This is junior college football he's talking about. I would die for this. Because for him, it's like, this is the place I have value. This is the place I matter. And again, when you similarly to prisons, if you look at his background, there's always certain things that line up. One being poverty. This is my way to escape poverty. This is the kid that in question. He used to have to steal chicken from the grocery store to feed him and his brother. It's always something like that. And so it's that that desperateness that sports thrives on.
But then you have the nerve to go and get intersectional with it, because our main characters are women.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us through that decision? I mean, and and they are not, what's that woman's name in the Hunger Games? They are not Katniss.
They're not Katniss. No disrespect to Katniss, but they're not Katniss.
Talk to me.
So in some ways, I don't know if it was, it was a decision eventually, but the initial decision kind of just happened. The spark of the book, or at least when I started writing it, it was going to be a short story for my first book. I wrote a story collection called Friday Black. I thought it was going to be a story in that. And I just had this image of this woman in the eye of the arena, this woman talking to thousands of people who loved her, but also she understood that love was very conditional. Once I started actually just going into realizing it was going to be a novel, it felt important for Thurwar to be a woman because, and I talk about this a little bit later in the book, there's a particular way in which a woman, particularly a black woman, will be both loved and hated, both exalted but disrespected, can be, right at the top, but trivialized. Also, no matter what they do will be perpetually sexualized. There's a particular way in which a black woman moving through a space will have to contend with the gamut of issues. And so with Thurwar just felt correct because as I started doing the research into prison, every population is connected. Every population is affected. And it just felt like she was the person who could contain all these multitudes that I felt like the issue called for. And when I think about it, it's both LeBron and Serena are both right at the top of their respective fields. And Serena maybe is the greatest ever, might be the best athlete of all time. And I think they both understand things that many of us don't understand, in terms of what it feels like to be in that position. But I think Serena understands something that even LeBron doesn't understand, about how even at the top, there's going to be this edge of something else, this harshness to it. And that felt very important for the protagonist of this book.
I was so moved by the relationship between the different characters that were all on the same chain.
Yeah.
The tenderness that you write in the face of all this brutality, I was really impressed with that.
Thank you.
I had emotions.
I appreciate it very much. Well, for me, when I was thinking through these characters who are just people in a difficult situation, which again, are people who are incarcerated are human beings in a difficult circumstance, I thought I wanted to make sure I gave a chance to highlight that they are people who are just as capable of feeling great love and great sorrow as any one of us. I think one of the primary ways that the prison industrial complex works is by getting us to think that those who are branded quote-unquote criminals or so-called criminals are somehow less capable of feeling. And so I just wanted to make sure I honored what I believe to be true and actually know to be true, which is we're all feeling. We all have that ability to care.
It's even kind of romantic.
The book, yeah.
It's so romantic.
Yeah.
It's like a book about like death matches and such, but it's so loving, and there's so much love in it. And you even have compassion for the people in the stands. I was impressed because that compassion I didn't feel, but I felt your compassion, and I respected it.
Yeah.
I just didn't join you.
I appreciate it. Like for me, like the game that I sort of challenged myself, and also like if it was, I totally understand what you're saying, because not as like me, the person walking through life, I probably wouldn't either. But the cool thing about a book is there's a version of writing where, to me, the revision process is like basically how much more love can I fold into this? How much more grace can I fold in? And I just go to my absolute limit, because that's sort of my attitude toward, I mean, the book ends up being, maybe like you have caught on by now, it's kind of in the spirit of abolition. And to me, that attitude requires like a lot of grace, which I think is like but in that, I can access that when I'm my highest, best self. But like in my regular life, if someone says, I mean, the churchness of it makes me want to not say things. If someone says F you to me, I'm like, well, F you too. And so like, it's so many factors. The fact that we're here, my uncle and aunt here, my dad's best friend, my Uncle BJ and Auntie Tanya, like they're here. So there's so many things I'm like trying not to say. I say a lot of curses like when I do events sometimes, but today I'm like keeping it together. But anyways, yeah, I try to fold as much grace as I can, because the same way I try to hold that for the person who has caused great harm and suffering, the person in the stands, the person who's like maybe oblivious or doesn't care, I try to hold in my mind, okay, there's a reason for this person being like that. There's a version of them that is better than this, and try to like almost see that, at least through the writing process. That's what I'm trying to get to over and over and over again, to my best of my ability. But I totally get it, because in real life, if this was real, I'd be like, F them.
But I would say I felt it. Like, I felt your compassion. And in some instances, it carried me over, and in others, I just couldn't go there with you. But I admired you for being where you were. Now, we're running low on time, so I want to make sure that those of you in the audience who have questions can ask questions. Or I will keep talking, but I would really love to hear your questions. That's like a microphone right there, and this one right there.
Who's the brave first person, the icebreaker?
I mean, I'll even walk around like Oprah. Ice has been broken.
That's my Uncle BJ.
Let's give him a round of applause.
Oh.
You couldn't come from such a, how did you put it? People who write fiction, you say there must be some reality in it, and the other way around, right? So to my mind, there's some reality in this. We talked about the Squid Game as a reality game in Korea, but actually right now there's the reality of the Russian-Ukrainian war, where prisoners in Russia actually now go to war and are being drafted into war only with a chance to get out if they serve 6 months and survive. That's the deal right now. And tens of thousands of them have lost their lives. And so this is, the New York Times does a story about this every week. And one gentleman had 5 years left on a 20-year sentence just last week. And he was long story short, he was turned back in to the Russians because the Ukrainians caught him and traded it in for some other prisoners, and they bashed his head against the wall with a hammer and put it on TV to discourage other people from doing it. My big point and question, and I would like to hear your reaction to it, is the reality. This is actually, your fiction is actually reality in the world right now.
Yeah.
And it's a horror on many levels. And I wonder if you see, my question is really about humanity. and what is the essence of humanity that allows to do this in a fictional space, but also it's actually in a very real place now and in the past and throughout human history?
Yeah, it's an important question, and it's kind of like a huge one, because it kind of speaks to like, how do you keep hoping, like knowing something like what you described is real. And even with the fiction of this book also has like nonfiction footnotes. So like the nature of the atrocities of even here domestically, I was almost shocked by just how, because I wrote the book kind of thinking, I hope I'm an abolitionist. And by the time I was like knee deep in it, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe, I'm sort of ashamed that we've allowed this extremely archaic, brutal system to last this long. What I think is, when I hear about some horror like that, I think about how there are many people who are victims of a small contingent of people who have a lot of power and have the ability to shape the destinies for many, many people, but also, maybe even more importantly, have the ability to shape and at least influence the imaginations and the potential outcomes for these people, meaning when that's on the table for someone, they think that's okay. And that's why, to me, one of the really, or I think that's like somewhat acceptable, or our humanity, or another way of thinking about humanity for me in this book is sort of agreed upon stance that every single life is sacred, no matter what someone has done. That can, and that should never be challenged, but I think if you have someone powerful enough telling you that actually I get to decide when you are human and when you're not, eventually you believe it. Systemically, you start to believe it. I think, what I like to say is like the poison's kind of in the water in this country and abroad. Because for us, whether it's, okay, if you do this criminal act, now you get to be treated like an animal in a cage, is one side, or if it's even just in terms of, until I get to X level of success, I don't really get to love myself. I don't really feel like I'm a worthy person. I don't really think I deserve love or to love myself or whatever. So I think that there are many, many, many systems sort of trying to stomp down our humanity. But I feel encouraged because whether it's Russia, whether it's America, where it's wherever place you might name, there are people expressing love, doing good things, even when it's like feels like it could be impossible. And so the tenderness that you like sort of spoke about between the members of the chain is an example of that. And it's not from nothing. If from doing research for this book, reading a book like Solitary by Albert Wood Fox, you have people who are sentenced to prison for the rest of their lives, spend all this time in solitary confinement, might have every single reason to be completely, devoid of any type of care for anyone. And that's just one example of someone who spent all this time advocating for his fellow inmates, advocating for so many people, and there's millions and millions of examples of this. So every time I hear this like mega horrors, what I usually think is, okay, like there's infrastructure that allows the powerful to exhibit like this super inhumane way of conducting themselves, but always, 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 there are those who are pushing back against it. And I try to be, in my work, sort of champion for those voices.
Thank you so much, Nana. And
Really good question.
I also want you to know that, Nana, I feel the pride of your father in your thoughts and in your work. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hey, look at all these characters. It's just world famous author Tiffany D. Jackson. Woo!
So I'm going to ask an annoying author question, just to jump off your uncle's question. What was the process for you, like, writing this book? Because, like, I don't think you take karate, but maybe you do. And so I don't know.
You don't think I what?
I don't think you take karate or, like, or fighting in the streets like that. But, like, even just you reading just felt so visceral. And so I'm just wondering, like, just your process as far as, like, knowing how you wrote this during, like, the last couple of years where we're all very siloed, just kind of curious.
It's a great question. There's so many different layers to it. But, like, there's many different voices. So I almost had, like, a different energy and vibe for different people. I wrote this book over the last 7 years, so I feel like I became like a different person from when I started to now. I think I wasn't really an adult. I was still in grad school. I hadn't had one book out. My father was still alive. So many things changed over the course. But if I talk about like the big sort of visceral like set pieces, like the first chapter, the not prologue, for me, what it ends up really being about is like the mechanics of, it ends up being more about choreography than, the action-y parts being about choreography, and I have to get that right, and then I try to make sure I'm sewing in almost like a conversation, because most of the fights are kind of like a conversation between people, but there's also like this like physical, she swung her arm with her right hand, and then went like this, and that means that if the person that she's swinging at ducks, what does it mean to duck, right? Oh, you hinge at the hip, her waist bent forward, the trunk swayed to the left. You know what I mean? That I'm like in the house doing this.
Did you act it out
Yes.
in the mirror?
I kind of just do, it depends. I got a huge mirror in my room, so sometimes I do that. It was there before I got there. I didn't put it there.
We did not
It
ask.
was there when I moved into the apartment. But it's ridiculous. So yeah,
started it.
then I swayed that way, and I think about it like that. And so those scenes are fun, for lack of a better term, for that reason. But it's always about revision. I'm big on revision. So I'll try to forget about it, then I read it back and see where it's like hitching, and I'll go back again. In general, though, this book was very difficult because I didn't have an end for so long. So I just felt like I was writing in the dark for a long time. So it was me just like throwing darts at a wall, attaching to the voices of certain characters, trying to think about just momentum. How could I keep momentum going? My first book is short stories, and I kind of feel like in my soul I'm a little bit of a short story writer because I really like that feeling of nothing is extra, nothing feels superfluous. And so yeah, I keyed in on certain characters' voices. Sometimes when I wasn't feeling this character, I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna jump to this other one, just get into like that voice. There's a guy named Hendrik Singer, and he's sort of like, he could be from like down here. He could be like, he has like a rhythm of like slightly like Southern or something, but he almost like, you could tell he's like has church in his background. There's something about him, sometimes I would like to get into that zone. Sometimes I would want to be in his other characters, like just consciousness. So me, it was about sticking to the characters' consciousnesses, but then when I was doing the big set piece fights, whatever, it was more about being a choreographer and then trying to see how I could fold in that like spirit of whatever conversation, or it ends up being love, but whatever that was.
Did you read comic books when you were little?
Comic books, yeah, for sure.
I felt like she like took Thor's hammer and beat him with it. Is
Yeah.
that what happened?
Kind of. It's kind of like that same kind of energy, and like this thing you inherited. Also, I'm really like an anime manga person, so I'm so used to like named weapons and inherited like violences, and also most importantly probably big conceit-heavy action being paired with serious philosophical exploration. Like a lot of the anime stuff that I'm into is really about, even though it's like old big Gundams, big robots fighting each other, it's really like a meditation on the ethics of war. For real.
Okay, sorry, I'm kind of tall. All right. Thank you guys so much. This is amazing and really fun.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, for sure. So my question is kind of about it being a speculative novel and like kind of set in another world, and like what do you think that does for addressing the issues that you're addressing, and like thinking about like kind of, because in American Marriage, that's about incarceration too, right? Like in a realist way, and it's like both of them do work to address it, and I'm just wondering like what like setting in another world, what kind of work do you see that doing?
So like how does
choice?
like the speculativeness help me like engage like the issue?
Yeah.
It's a great question. For me, I like working with the speculative because from my kind of writing, I think that if I get too specific, sometimes it could. I like the speculative form because I can be hyper specific, but it's also hard to reduce. So sometimes, say I wrote about Angola State Prison, right? Some people might be like, well, I'm like dunking on Louisiana or something specifically. Or they might be like, even though I think that some writers do an excellent job of talking about, I think you can get to the universal through the specific as well. But for me, I like having the ability to like fluctuate at will, where I can throw in, this is a specific fact about Auburn prison systems, which were real in New York, where they had enforced silence 24 hours, and I can say that specifically, but also from using that fact, I can create this like experimental prison where prisoners are always silenced, but now because of their implants, they can be shocked if they speak. And for me, I like that. I like playing with that because first, it's just malleable to my imagination. I get to like stretch and pull it how I want. But also, I think the implicit argument I'm always making, that's why I like the future spaces. It feels like if that was okay, why is this not okay? Usually the second thing is something that should be considered horrific. But I'm sort of saying, but you just said, but you did that and you did that. There's like this false idea of the evolution of like ethics of the capital punishment. Like it's always the thing that you did last that was terrible. You were quartering people with horses and you're like, well, that was horrible. Now we just hang them because we're like nice. And then we're like, wait, we used to have gallows. We don't do that anymore. Now we have an electric chair. And now the electric chair has become antiquated because like, you know what, now we do lethal injection, which is also very, very, like, because there's a paralyzing agent is the first of the cocktail, it seems like it's not hurting people, but actually we know for sure that people are getting brutalized silently. So it lets me play around and be both really broad, but I can be specific if I want to. And I guess I like the dynamic range is what I would call it. I feel like I like the dynamic range of working in the speculative form because it just lets me like flex a lot of the muscles that I think as a writer I enjoy flexing.
Well, we're basically out of time, but I have one more question before we wrap it up, which is, what advice do you have for people who have a book they want to write that they haven't written yet?
Write it. No. It's so like this book especially, like I said, the 7 years. That's a long trust fall. That's like a long time to be falling with no real guarantee. If you really want to write a book, sometimes even thinking that way can be challenging. I would say, what if you write a page today, and you write a page tomorrow? Because I didn't write 300. I can't believe I wrote almost a 400-page book. Because I'm not that kind of writer. I thought, but I did. But someone said that to me. How did you write? I said I didn't write a 400-page book. I wrote 2 hours or 1,000 words every day for a long time. So this is like a very kind of practical discipline thing. So maybe it's like not that fun, but this is helpful to me. If you can remember why you're doing it, remember that discipline is kind of a gift you can give yourself. If you can worry about the sentence that's in front of you, write this sentence right now. If you do that long enough, you might get a whole lot of books.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Let's give him a round of applause.
I appreciate it. And thank you. Incredible. I like Atlanta.
Thank you all so much for coming. Do stop and visit Karis Books out there and pick up a copy of The Chain Gang All-Stars. Nana will be up here at the table signing those for you. One more round of applause for the most sartorial pair that we've had on this stage in a while, Tayari and Nana. Thank you all so much for coming.